And today I'm going to be talking about sleep. Sleep is one of those elusive phenomena that is extremely important for our mental health, our physical health, and for every aspect of our well being. So, I'm Lucy McBride. I'm a primary care doctor. I'm in Washington, D.C., where the pollen is as thick as mud right now. And every week on my Substack in my newsletter, I write about issues that I talk about with my patients every day: mental health, physical health, and their inseparability, how to make complex decisions, how to optimize your health and your well being while finding balance in your life. So it's not surprising that I'm going to talk about sleep. I've written about it many, many times. But there's like there's not enough time on the planet to talk about to talk about sleep. We need to talk about sleep more. Um, so the average person will spend 26 years of their life asleep. That's like a third or a quarter of people's life. So it's an important part of our entire existence. We've got to talk about it. And then most people think of sleep as an afterthought. A lot of people I see think of sleep as a luxury. They think of it as their downtime. And so first thing I want to say to you is if you think sleep is your downtime, that's your like me time, then we've got to figure out something else because sleep is a biological necessity. So I'm a primary care doctor. I see patients every day. I talk to people about everything from dementia to depression to diabetes. I love alliteration, the 3Ds. Those are common things I talk about. All three of those things, dementia, diabetes, and depression, all are benefited by better sleep. The problems are the amount of sleep people are getting, the quality of sleep people are getting, and then the appreciation of sleep for their health. So let's cover all those today. We're going to talk today about why sleep might be the most underrated health intervention and what's really happening in your brain while you sleep, and then also some practical strategies to help you get better sleep. And not a day goes by where I talk about sleep with when I don't talk about sleep with patients. So your brain typically cycles through 4 or 5 sleep cycles every night, each about 90 minutes. And the REM sleep is when dreaming occurs. And that's about 25% of your total sleep. Um, Deep sleep is when physical restoration happens, and it's about 13 to 20% of your total sleep time. Fun fact is that your brain paralyzes your body during that REM sleep to prevent you from acting out your dreams, which is lucky for all of us. Many of us can remember our dreams. It's interesting how you can remember them sometimes right when you wake up and then not later or even like 5 minutes later. But our body gets paralyzed. We've all woken up during REM sleep. You know the feeling where your body is like, it's almost like you can't move it. That's because you woke up during REM sleep. So interestingly, your brain doesn't shut down when you're sleeping. Um, Parts of it are actually more alert and alive, if you will, than when you're awake. Um, and But during deep sleep, that's when like the little sanitation workers are coming through your brain and cleaning up all the metabolic waste from the day. So if you think about it this way, sleep is basically when you're tidying up from the day and your neurobiology is being cleaned up so that the next day you're functioning better. So the other thing that happens during sleep is that memory gets consolidated. So sleep is when your brain decides what to remember and what to forget. We'll get to this later, but it's unsurprising then to understand why sleep is so important in cognitive health. Growth hormone secretion also peaks during sleep, which explains in part why kids need so much more sleep than adults. People who sleep less than 6 hours a night are 4 times more likely to catch a cold when they're exposed to a virus. I used to think that was an old wives' tale. Like my mom would tell us to go to bed when I was a kid and tell us that we were going to get sick if we didn't get enough rest, but it's actually true. So importantly, sleep helps with mental health, physical health, and specifically with immune health, cognitive health. And it is when your brain gets tidied up and those little sanitizer workers come into your brain and clean up the metabolic waste so that the next day you're fresh. So, what are we dealing with in terms of, you know, Americans and their sleep, and what do I see in my office every single day? Well, people are not sleeping enough. Let's just state the facts. About 35% of American adults say they sleep less than 7 hours a night. You really need, on average, 6 to 8 hours of sleep. Some people can get by with less, some people need more. How much sleep you need to feel refreshed and productive and functional and clear during the day really depends on you. And I think we all kind of know what our set point is. The question is, are you getting it? And 35% of Americans aren't getting what they need. Um, the average night's sleep, apparently, per some studies I've read, has decreased from 8 to 9 hours in the early 20th century to just 6.8 hours today. And it makes sense. We've got everything from light pollution to these devices that are, capturing our attention, to caffeine and alcohol and, a political kind of crisis in this country. Um, Work demands. I mean, people are working more than they ever did before. People are working remotely and working from home, which is obviously great for people's lifestyle in many cases, but it also makes the boundaries between work and home a little blurrier, which can make it harder to turn the brain off. And also, if you can be up on your laptop working at night, you're less likely to be relaxed. I remember when I was um, a young mom and driving home from work, I used that commute home from work as my sort of like wind down, like mental wind down to then enter the second shift of my day, which was caring for my kids, dinner time, bath time, bedtime, etc. Now with work from home, a lot of people don't have that natural separation between work and home. So one of the more common things I see in my office is people not sleeping enough or sleeping in a quality way because they just have the flood of thoughts from the day marinating through their brains. Um, so 30% of adults report symptoms of insomnia, and 10% have chronic insomnia disorders. Now, I'm guessing that's an underestimate because people don't have a primary care doctor to even tell these problems to. And B, I think a lot of people don't think they have insomnia. They don't think they don't get enough sleep. They just are so inured to getting inadequate or non-restful sleep that they might not even report it as not enough rest. Women are 40% more likely to experience insomnia than men. And importantly, people with insomnia are almost 3 times more likely to develop depression. I mean, there's a bidirectionality between depression and insomnia. In other words, depression can cause insomnia and insomnia can cause depression. But let's just say sleep is one of the things you can work on or try to work on to improve mood. Um, let's talk about a classic patient I see in my office. I see this all the time. So patients come in and they say, Doc, I can't sleep. I get in bed and I turn off the lights and it's hard to fall asleep. So falling asleep is hard. And then number two, they say, I get in bed and maybe I can fall asleep because I'm exhausted from the day, but I can't stay asleep. And one of the more common reasons for that is the absence of kind of mindfulness and deep relaxation during the day. You may be laughing when I recommend to you trying to have moments of stillness during your day. I'm working on this myself. I'm actually reading a book right now on transcendental meditation by Bob Roth, who's like one of the leading experts on transcendental meditation. And I'm doing that out of necessity because I think having access to the still, calm waters beneath the surface of your brain activity is one of the best ways to improve sleep quality, mood, emotional regulation. It's also good for blood pressure and cardiovascular health. There's so much data to support the use of transcendental meditation when it comes to sleep. The reason I bring this up in the context of this story I'm telling you about a patient who comes in saying I can't fall asleep and I can't stay asleep is because the common mechanism for those two complaints is the noisy brain. If you think about your brain activity as a set of surface reactions, like chemical reactions, like waves on an ocean, um, and you're sitting in a boat. Pretend that you're sitting in a boat and you're sitting on the surface of the ocean and you're looking all around you and there's blue ocean everywhere. And then little waves come up and your boat is kind of rocking. Think of your brain activity, like the anxieties, the worries, the to-do list, the darting thoughts here and there as waves on an ocean. The way we can try to access that deep calm is to imagine accessing the deep, miles deep ocean beneath us. So the waves are the surface brain activity, the to-do list, the oh my gods, the what if I forget to turn my daughter's camp forms in? What if I, said something weird to that person and they are judging me? What if, you know, What if, what if, what if? And beneath you is this miles deep stillness and ocean of calm. Accessing that is what is going to help you go to sleep. If indeed your sleep issue is related to the noisy brain phenomenon, which I would say is probably the most common reason people have a hard time sleeping. So TM is just one modality. Transcendental meditation is one modality to help you access that deep calm that we all have within us. It's the brain activity that is our deep unconscious mind. It's where creativity lives. It's where wonder lives. It's where curiosity lives. And it's ultimately where calm lives. And there's real power in that stillness and that access to the unconscious mind. I don't know if I'm ever going to learn how to do TM properly, um, but it is arguably the most natural, simple, and organic way to meditate. There are lots of other kinds of meditation varieties. You may have done them yourself. You may do them yourself. And I think a lot of people think of meditation as an exercise in pushing your thoughts away, like thoughts are the enemy. And I think for me, always, that's been hard to imagine doing that because the idea of pushing away thoughts as someone who has a noisy brain seems infinitely difficult. It also is work. And if you're trying to relax and you're doing work, pushing thoughts away, it kind of feels counterintuitive. So, anyway, I encourage you to think about TM as a way that you can try to learn to meditate and access that deep stillness and calm without having to use this idea of pushing thoughts away. In fact, TM, it's not a religion, it's not a cult, it's just the most organic, natural way to approach mindfulness and meditation. So, why else are people not sleeping? If the number one cause that I see and that is out there is the noisy brain and difficulty accessing the deep calm, here are the other common problems or reasons people are having a hard time sleeping. So, sleep apnea. So, sleep apnea is probably underdiagnosed because people don't have primary care doctors or they don't report that they're snoring or they think that snoring is just snoring. Snoring can irritate the bed partner, right? But snoring can also be an apneic event. So, what is sleep apnea? Sleep apnea is when you're not getting enough air at night. You're not getting enough oxygenation. The common cause of sleep apnea is positional. So if you're lying on your back and your tongue and your jaw and your posterior oropharynx is relaxed and you are asleep, you can run the risk of cutting off your airway intermittently and not getting enough oxygen. It's more common in people who are overweight, who have obesity. It's more common in people who are back sleepers and who drink alcohol or take other sedatives that relax the tongue and oropharynx. It's also It also can happen even without any weight issues, but if you have a small oropharynx, like I have a patient who has a very small oral aperture, and if I look in the back of her throat, I cannot see much except her tongue. It's not that she has a big tongue, it's just it's a little room in there. And so when you diagnose someone with sleep apnea using a sleep study, an overnight sleep study, either at home or in a lab, and the person treats the sleep apnea with either sleep hygiene changes or CPAP, the device that you may have heard of, people can sleep longer and better, and they almost always report a general sense of well being that they didn't have before. Obviously, the worse apnea you have, the more benefit you're going to get from treating it, right? So if you have apneic events every couple times an hour, and you drop your oxygen saturation during your sleep study to like 50%, you're going to feel like $1,000,000 when you get a CPAP because you're treating those desaturations in oxygen and you're treating the absence of airflow. You're getting airflow that you haven't had before. I even had a patient probably 10 years ago who came in and he was a new patient and thought he had dementia. He was a highly functioning person in his 60s, and his workmates were telling him he was slipping. And they were asking him if he was drinking. They sort of accused him of being an alcoholic, and he wasn't a drinker. So he came in and he was asking me, "Do I have dementia? Do I have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?" So we talked about his sleep. It turned out his sleep was really bad, and he was waking up and feeling headachy in the morning and like he'd run a marathon in the night despite having been in bed for 7 hours. Sleep study showed severe apnea He got on a CPAP and cognitively he improved dramatically. Now that's, kind of unusual to have that dramatic of a symptom from sleep apnea and not know that you had apnea in some other way because you were snoring or someone told you, "Wow, you sound like a train when you're in bed." But the point is that sleep apnea is something to pay attention to. And let me also just sidebar on sleep apnea for a second. When I ask patients, "Do you think you snore? Do you think you have apnea?" This is like a reflexive answer. Yes, I snore, but there's no way I'm gonna use that CPAP machine, even if I had apnea. And to patients who I am highly suspicious of sleep apnea, I will say, totally understand. It's very difficult to imagine sleeping with like a mouth apparatus with like a tube that goes into a machine that's, you know, blowing air into your mouth at night. However, sleep apnea doesn't just manifest itself as snoring. Sleep apnea can strain the heart. It can affect cognition, as I just told you about in this patient example. It can affect blood pressure. Um, it can affect people's sense of well being. It can cause depression. It can be debilitating in myriad ways. So, when someone in my office is a person who I suspect apnea, and I remind them that it's not the apnea test. First of all, you might not have sleep apnea, so then you wouldn't have to solve for it. But let's not make the test or the idea of having the treatment for it the barrier to getting that information. Because if you do have sleep apnea, treating it in whatever way we end up treating it is probably going to help you in myriad ways. Okay, why else do people have um, sleep problems? Stimulants. So caffeine. We all love coffee. I love coffee. Life would not be worth living without coffee. To me, coffee, even if you drink coffee in the morning, and certainly if you drink coffee after noon or caffeine of any kind, can last in your system for a lot longer than you think. Like it can be in your system 12 hours later. Not to mention that it just sort of, if you're someone who is used to having coffee and certainly volumes of it, and then you have wine at night, that combination of the stimulant and the depressant, the stimulant and the depressant, which is a very common pattern in modern life, can in some ways kind of hijack your body's natural sleep wake cycles. So I'm not saying that you should never have a cup of coffee or never have a glass of wine. I'm simply saying that it's not surprising to me anymore when patients really cut back on coffee and really cut back on alcohol that their sleep improves. Because it's almost like they're letting their body resume its natural sleep wake cycles, and your body you become more attuned to your own cues. So that's something to consider. The other stimulants people often take are those energy drinks, like chocolate is caffeine. Caffeine is in a lot of different things. Caffeine is sometimes in those like protein bars and other drinks. And then, of course, Adderall, Vyvanse, stimulants that are taken commonly for attention deficit disorder can make it difficult to fall asleep. So I don't think we were made as human beings to be up as much as we are. I mean, I think, if you think about like the Neanderthals, they rose with the sunrise and went to bed with the sunset. They didn't have Twitter, Instagram, and they didn't have certainly didn't have a political crisis in front of them. Maybe they did. Maybe they had politics that was just on a less massive level. But I'm just saying they had more natural cues like sunrise, sunset than we do in modern life. We most people in modern life wake up to an alarm or wake up because they've got to go to work, of course, and they get coffee and they go about their days. They're not paying attention necessarily to like hunger and satiety, not to mention sleep wake cycles. And then oftentimes what we don't do well is give ourselves the time and the space to have the bedtime wind down routine. So I am totally a victim of this too. Like I will be working up to like 10 o'clock and I want to go to bed, say at 10:30 or 11. And it's not going to do yourself any favor by assuming that going from your laptop and being activated on your laptop and then 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, you're going to feel sleepy and then go to bed naturally and sleep well. So I think one thing that I recommend to patients all the time is giving yourself that space that like our Neanderthal ancestors had built in automatically to let yourself wind down. And this goes back to that TM I was talking about a minute ago, is like accessing that deep stillness, the ocean beneath the surface waves of brain activity so that you can access the feeling of sleepiness. Um, I love that feeling of sleepiness. I don't love it when I'm sitting in a movie theater or I'm watching a play or, waiting in traffic, but I love the feeling of sleepiness. Don't you know that feeling of like when it's like around your bedtime and you feel sleepy and you have access to going to bed? It's like the best feeling. It's such a natural feeling. And I think that the more we can kind of tune into our natural sleepiness, the better we do. And that requires mindfulness itself. It requires getting off the screens. It requires, you know, deciding to make a list of to-dos for the next day so that it's not pinging around in your head all night long. It requires perhaps not reading the news at night. I've changed to reading the news in the morning because if I'm awake, I might as well be more awake or more alert. Um, so yeah, people who are sleep deprived, just going back to like the reasons sleep deprivation are not great for you, people who are sleep deprived consume an average of 300 more calories per day. So another reason to get more sleep is because people often confuse sleeplessness and hunger. So when you're dragging during the day, and we all do this, right? When you're dragging in the day because you haven't had enough rest, what do? You grab the comfort foods, you grab the quick calorie dense foods, the pick me up, the reward. That just completely makes sense, right? Not to mention that chronic sleep deprivation can indirectly affect metabolic health. So sleep apnea in particular can slow metabolism, but even chronic sleep deprivation, for whatever reason, can make our metabolic health less efficient. It makes our insulin less efficient. Um, so let's talk about sleep and mental health. One of my favorite topics is mental health, as you probably know. Um, so as I said in the beginning, there's a bidirectionality between insomnia and mental health. In other words, many common mental health disorders are associated with insomnia and vice versa. Insomnia can exacerbate many common mental health disorders. So let's talk about depression. So depression, one of the diagnostic criteria actually for depression is either what's called psychomotor retardation, meaning fatigue, like psychic fatigue and sort of a sleepiness. Another diagnostic criteria can be early waking. So depression can certainly mess with our circadian rhythms and cause us to wake up early repeatedly. It can also make us sleep and want to go into the covers and stay asleep and sleep more. Um, so depression can exacerbate insomnia or sleepiness, or it could also make us wake up earlier. And poor sleep can inform mood, right? I think it's no surprise to anybody to hear that when you don't sleep well, you're going to be less energetic. It's going to pull on mood. And so one of the main arguments I make to people for getting more sleep is for mood regulation. Irritability is one of the more common symptoms of depression. I think we all can relate to this idea of when you're not rested, you're more quick to snap. You're more quick to, have road rage. You're more quick to be just reactive at the workplace or as a parent or as a caregiver. That's not that you're depressed. It's just that irritability is a feature of depression. Irritability is a product of not getting enough sleep. And irritability just doesn't feel good to the owner of the irritability, to say the least. What about anxiety? So anxiety, I've talked about this extensively for the past 5 years that I've been writing my newsletter. Anxiety, as you all know, is a normal feature of the human condition. It is part of the way we're built. It's actually adaptive. It helps us run from the danger. It helps us pay our taxes on time. It helps us, you know, get to the train on time. Anxiety also can take on a life of its own. So when anxiety takes on a life of its own, when it occupies more brain space than is comfortable and or that is causing emotional symptoms, cognitive symptoms, or physical symptoms, then we call that an anxiety disorder. We call anxiety a disorder when it's interfering with our quality of life or our health. For example, if anxiety is causing insomnia. So I said at the top that one of the most common reasons for insomnia is the noisy brain. That is a couple clicks over from an anxious brain, right? The noisy brain and the anxious brain are kind of synonymous. It's just a question of degree. The anxious brain, when I call it an anxiety disordered brain, meaning a brain that that is housing a level of anxiety that is outsized compared to what the threat is. In other words, anxiety that is out of proportion to the actual threat. That is an anxiety problem where anxiety is causing insomnia and the anxiety is the noise that is keeping the person from falling asleep. What do I mean by noise? I mean ruminations, repetitive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, and the vigilance required to talk back to anxious thoughts, to worry, to fear. Now, let's acknowledge again that some level of vigilance and anxiety is necessary, and some anxiety and vigilance is appropriate, right? If you have a new diagnosis of a chronic illness and you're going to bed anxious, that is because you're human, right? So having some level of anxiety is normal. The question isn't, do you have anxiety and resulting sleeplessness on occasion? The question is, to what extent is anxiety interfering with your sleep? And to what extent is your anxiety bigger than it, quote, needs to be for the level of threat? So those are questions that you can answer amongst yourselves. Those are the kinds of questions I ask my patients in the office when we're talking about sleep in particular. And those are the kinds of questions that are important to answer when you're trying to figure out what the strategic plan is for your sleep. What I mean is, if you're trying to solve your sleep problem with magnesium, for example, and we're going to get to solutions in a minute. If you're trying to solve your sleep problem with magnesium and you have an anxiety disorder driving your insomnia, magnesium is not going to do a whole lot. It may help a little bit, but to the extent that insomnia, difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, can in many cases be a symptom of an anxiety disorder or OCD, um, it's important to address the anxiety disorder head on. Again, some level of vigilance, some level of insomnia is normal, but when anxiety and insomnia are taking a big chunk of your brain space, then that's worth talking to your doctor about. Um, why do I say this? Because we treat the insomnia based on what the mechanism of action is. In other words, if your insomnia is because of you're drinking too much caffeine because you're studying for your exams right now, like my daughter is at school, um, then the treatment isn't an anxiety medication or psychotherapy. The treatment is cutting back on caffeine and finishing your exams. If your insomnia problem is because of sleep apnea, the solution is ask your doctor how to get tested for sleep apnea and treat for sleep apnea. And if you already have CPAP and you're still not rested, then maybe there's something else going on. And if your sleep problem is because of the noisy brain, because you are a member of society in America in modern times, um, then you want to think about specific strategies to help quiet the noisy brain. And if your noisy brain is veering into a space where we would call it an anxiety disorder, where the anxiety is taken on a life of its own and it's an outsized sense of anxiety relative to the level of threat to your health and well-being and safety, then you want to think about broader strategies to manage the anxiety itself. So, and then I'm also going to say about anxiety, on the subject of anxiety and insomnia and that sort of bidirectionality between those two things. Sometimes the treatment for an anxiety disorder is sleep itself. So there's a cat chasing its tail analogy, if you will, between anxiety and insomnia, right? Same with depression and insomnia. If you're anxious, you may experience insomnia. If your insomnia is a factor, you may be feeling more anxious. In other words, there's this sort of cycle that can start to happen. We've all been there, I'm sure, when you don't sleep well and then you're more anxious the next day and then your anxiety makes you not sleep well. And those are terrible ruts to be in. The point I'm trying to make is that make sure you're not ignoring an anxiety disorder that should be addressed with more than just chamomile tea. So, what was I saying earlier about insomnia and anxiety? I think what I was trying to say is that one of the features of that cycle of anxiety insomnia is that fear of bedtime. I remember this when I was a young mom. My kids were like really, really little. When sleep was not a guaranteed rest, when I didn't have those little sanitation workers coming in at night and cleaning up my metabolic waste in my brain because I was wide awake breastfeeding most of the night. And so sleep became like not a respite. It became like a thing I dreaded. So then I was like anxious in the day and then didn't sleep at night and anxious. It was terrible. The solution was my kids getting older and also having my husband take more time in the night to help feed the babies, which he always did. Um, and, that was that. But my point is that even if you don't have newborn babies that you're breastfeeding, there can become this sort of psychological fear of insomnia that itself can cause anxiety. So sometimes the way we treat anxiety is by just treating the sleep. Sometimes the way we treat insomnia is by treating the anxiety. So the question you want to ask yourself and ask your doctor, your therapist, your spouse, or whatever is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Like, what's coming first? Are you anxious and you're not sleeping, or are you not sleeping and then you're anxious? And it sometimes is both. So in a minute, and I guess we could talk about it right now, let's talk about the evidence-based strategies to get more sleep. This is probably why you're here. I mean, we've talked so far about why sleep is important. Cognitive health, mental health, cardiovascular health, general well-being, and you spend 26 years on average if you live till you're like 80 years old, let's say, or 90 years old. Most people spend about 26 years in bed or asleep. So you want to focus on this part of your life. For anyone who thinks that sleep is their self-care or their me time, like, we got to get beyond that, because sleep is a biological need. It's important for your entire health. We talked about common reasons for insomnia. In my experience, it's the noisy brain, the anxious brain, the overstimulated brain from caffeine, alcohol, stimulants. Other medications can do it too. Some medications can cause insomnia, like steroids for asthma. I have a patient who's on a high dose steroids for a lymphoma, and she's sleeping terribly. So there's a whole other medical set of problems that can cause insomnia. But I'm just talking sort of about like basic bread and butter insomnia today. And now let's talk about evidence-based ways for better sleep. So most people sleep best when they're in a cool temperature. So the room should be between 65 and 68 degrees. Especially if you're going through menopause, you want to make sure you have a cool room. Even if you're not going through menopause, even if you're a man and you're 80 years old, you want to have a cool room. So that is when most people sleep best, is when their room is 65 to 68 degrees. Darkness. So blackout curtain can be a great investment. Light stimulates our awakeness. So think about getting blackout curtains if you're having a hard time sleeping. White noise machines. I love these things. I have these white noise machine apps on my phone. I have them on, especially if like my kids have a bunch of friends over in our basement and they're making noise. And I just turn that white noise machine on loud, and it helps a lot. Reducing your screen time. This is a big one. I've talked about this already, but getting off your screens. The light that is emitted from the screens itself is stimulating, separate from the content that you're reading. Because if you're reading about whatever's happening in the news right now and you're on a screen, that is a double whammy. You're going to be stimulating your brain in multiple ways. You're still going to be stimulating your brain if you're reading a newspaper and reading about the horrors of what's happening in our world, or around the globe. But it's a little bit better than reading on a screen. And then if you're reading poetry on a screen, you're still stimulating your brain when you're looking at the screen. So think about getting off screens, ideally an hour or two before you go to bed. This is the mistake I make almost every night. And I kind of bargain with myself every single night saying, oh, tomorrow will be fine. And no, it's so much better when I read my book. Like last night, I read my Bob Roth book about TM, and therefore I slept better. And I feel so much better today. I mean, like, I feel so good when I sleep. And I bet you do too. I don't feel perfect. There are other things going on, but at a baseline, I feel a lot better when I've gotten good sleep. Another trick is to take a hot bath. So being warm, being in water stimulates sleepiness. I sometimes take a hot bath and I put Epsom salts. Epsom salts are magnesium salts, and they are supposed to help with muscle relaxation. It's also just the notion of creating a bedtime routine and ritual that is relaxing. Like the idea of simply prioritizing your bedtime routine. It's also that you're by definition off screens if you're in a bathtub, which hopefully you are. Otherwise, you're going to get electrocuted. Exercise. Exercise is important for every single organ system, brain, heart, bones, everything, you name it. It's important for sleep efficiency. When you exercise in the day, you're going to sleep better, most likely. The other thing people recommend all the time is consistent sleep schedule. So going to bed the same time, waking up the same time every day, even on the weekends, is ideal. I've never done that, I will be honest. I love sleeping on the weekends. I love sleeping in. It's so funny when I do like a girls' weekend, everyone gets up early and is like chit chat, like with coffee at like 7 a.m, and I am just like dead asleep. I love sleeping. I love that alone time. I love just sleeping. Um, the point is I don't do that thing where you get up and go to bed at the same time every day. And maybe that's something I need to work on, but that is apparently very good for you, is to get up, is to train your brain to be awake at 7 and in bed at 10, say. I'm making that up, but whatever works for you. We talked about caffeine already. Caffeine's half-life is 5 or 6 hours, meaning that 50% remains in your system long after consumption. So even if you had coffee at like 8 in the morning, it's probably still kicking around in your afternoon body. Alcohol reduces REM sleep. We talked about that. Um, and then the cognitive checks that we've talked about a little bit. Doing a 5-minute gratitude journal, writing in a journal at all, downloading your thoughts before bed helps disarm them. I have been a journaler since I was a kid. I'm not always consistent about it, but I'm pretty sold on the notion that writing helps clarify my thinking, helps download thoughts from my noisy brain and puts them on writing. That's why I write my newsletter, actually, because it's where I'm really, really focused and really, really thinking through things, and that is very calming for me. So I would recommend to anyone who's struggling with sleep, considering having a journal where you put all the thoughts down. And don't be perfectionistic about it. Like, one of the reasons I don't journal is because I think I should, oh, I haven't written in so long and I've got to catch the journal up. No rules. Just free form write. It doesn't have to be in perfect handwriting. It doesn't have to be organizationally great. It just is putting down what is on the mind. That can liberate some brain space that can then be occupied with sleep. Um, I love the 4-7-8 breathing. So breathing and deep breathing is a very natural way to bring that adrenaline and cortisol stress hormone system down, to bring back the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the arm of your nervous system that is responsible for calm and for sleepiness and the sort of like, it's going to be okay part of your brain. So when you do 4-7-8 breathing, it can really, really help activate the parasympathetic nervous system and help you feel sleepy. I use this all the time myself. 4-7-8 breathing is when you take 4 seconds to inhale to the top of your lungs. So 4, hold for 7, which can feel like a long time, but it's necessary. And then 8-second exhale. So 4-7-8 breathing. Some people like box breathing. Some people like just deep breathing, like in, out, in, out. For some reason, I like the 4-7-8. Pick your breathing exercise, but it is a wonderful natural way of calming the brain down. If you pair that with your room being 65, 68 degrees, making your room dark, if getting blackout shades if you need it, getting off your screens an hour or two before bedtime, creating a bedtime ritual, getting in a bath, for example, journaling, gratitude, writing, reading either a boring book or a very easy to digest book, and then breathing, that's going to help you a lot. I also do this. I have a yoga mat by my bedside. I don't do it every night, but just stretching, um, 5 minutes of stretching. I don't know if you're like me, but I get sometimes like Charlie horses, like cramps in my legs and my feet. But stretching and breathing can also really help. Um, so those are the main things I recommend. Let's talk about sleep aids, sleep medications. So people ask me about this all the time. Um, is it okay to take Benadryl? Is it okay to take Unisom? Is it okay to take Ambien? What do you think? So the answer to the question is it depends. Um, Sleeplessness is not good for you. And medications like the antihistamines are also not great for you if you take them long term. So we're trying to thread a needle here where you're getting sleep, but you're not overdoing medications that can do harm cognitively. I really don't like Ambien. I will recommend Ambien to patients for like jet lag or, if they're in a really bad sort of temporary rut of sleeplessness that we can't troubleshoot in other ways. But Ambien used long term and nightly is not good for cognitive health. It also is arguably masking another issue that we should be treating in other ways. Similarly, the medications I use for anxiety, for short term anxiety relief, like Ativan, clonazepam, Xanax. Those medications are good for short-term anxiety-related sleeplessness, but they're not really meant for they're not at all meant for long-term use, like daily use. In other words, it's not only that the medications themselves can drag on cognition, just like alcohol can pull on cognitive health, so can clonazepam and Xanax and Ativan. It's not only that they aren't great for cognition, it's that if you need one of those medications every single night, it means that we're missing something else that we should be treating. We're missing an anxiety problem. We're missing the opportunity to help you with sleep hygiene. We're missing the opportunity to treat your sleep apnea, or we're missing the opportunity to help you kind of sink into that deep stillness, like we talked about in the beginning, the ocean of calm that lives in each of us that is sometimes not accessible. Um, Now, there are inherent sleep disorders that require daily sleep medications, and those are less common though than sleepiness is related to sleep hygiene, overstimulation, anxiety, depressive disorders. Um, for over-the-counter relief for like nightly use, I really don't mind people, and I actually recommend people use as needed magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate. If you have constipation, it's magnesium citrate. If you have normal bowel habits, um, then I usually recommend magnesium glycinate. Magnesium is a very natural way to help with sleep. It's not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet, but magnesium is a mineral. It's naturally occurring and it can help with muscle relaxation, sleep, and it can cause diarrhea. So that's why I don't recommend it to people who have loose stool. Um, what about these like CBD gummies? So people ask me all the time about like CBD gummies. I think they're fine. I mean, I think again, like the harm of these medications or the harm of like over the counter supplements is probably pretty minimal, if any. The bigger harm is like, are we masking something else? Are you anxious? Are you depressed? And we're not addressing that first. But if you're just looking to get a little bit of a better sleep because you have a noisy brain and you have a noisy life and there's no way around that, and you're doing all the things you already can do, like, you know, room temperature and sleep hygiene, etc., then sure, magnesium is safe. Magnesium glycinate or magnesium oxide or magnesium citrate. Um, I think CBD gummies are fine. I think they're natural. I think they're much better than Ambien if I had to pick. Um, I think it's fine to use chamomile tea. I think it's fine to use some people like L-theanine. I don't have any experience with that. There's not a lot of great data to show that it helps with sleep, but anecdotally people think it helps. What else do people ask me about? Ask away if you have questions about sleep aids. There's so many sleep aids over the counter right now that it's a dizzying array of tricks. Um, but I think magnesium. Oh, melatonin. People ask me about melatonin all the time. Hey, Jackie Nessie, I'd love your thoughts on some of these sleep aids. So I think melatonin is fine. Melatonin is a naturally occurring hormone. Um, I would say that anecdotally, most of my patients report not getting much of a benefit from melatonin. They feel like it's more placebo than anything else. And then I have other patients who swear by it. Like their 5 milligrams nightly melatonin is what keeps them asleep. Yes, Benadryl, when you travel, can help with sleep. Benadryl to me is so sedating and groggy making that I don't like it. But for some people, it's all they need. Like 12.5 milligrams is a nice baby dose. Some people take 50 milligrams. If you happen to have allergies because you're living in DC or somewhere on the East Coast, um, is a nice twofer. Hits the allergies and the sinus congestion and sleep. Benadryl, though, used long term, nightly for days, weeks, years, can have negative effects on cognitive health. So I really steer clear of Benadryl in my older patients in particular. Um, so yeah, I think as we talked about in summary, sleep is an essential ingredient for health, for our cognitive health, our mental health, our physical health. It is an under-recognized important biological need. I think people think of it as an afterthought, like if you happen to get sleep, it's a bonus. But it really is a basic biological need. And there's so many things we can avoid medicating if you get sleep. In other words, if you're someone who prioritizes sleep and you treat it like your job to get a good night's sleep and to get enough time in bed, you are going to be benefiting every organ system in your body, from your brain to your heart to your immune system to your relationship health. You're going to be less irritable. You're going to be less likely to cut people off in traffic. Your memory is going to be better. And it's just good to get sleep. So I think that is basically what I have to say about sleep. If you guys have any questions, please do. Everyone's been very quiet this time, but I'd love to answer your questions if you had any. Um, and again, ask me questions if there are specific sleep disorders that I didn't talk about. But again, most of the time in my office, people are not sleeping because they're either anxious, overstimulated, or they have some medication that's causing side effects. And I find that most sleep problems are figure outable. Oh, I didn't talk about trazodone or prescription medications for sleep. So I said up front that I don't love Ambien because Ambien doesn't really care why you're not sleeping. It just makes people sleepy. Now, that's sometimes a benefit if you're jet lagged, but sleeplessness that is chronic and that is interfering with mental health, interfering with emotional health, interfering with cognitive health, that is for no particular reason. It's not sleep apnea. It's not the noisy brain. We've done all the sleep hygiene sort of workarounds. For that person, I often recommend trazodone. Trazodone is my favorite prescription medication for sleep. It's not a panacea though, like like any medication. It's only as good as the whole kit we put together for sleep. But take, for example, my patient who has insomnia and anxiety, insomnia, and the anxiety and the insomnia are feeding each other. Sometimes what that person needs is just a routine to get sleep every single night, and putting them on trazodone helps with the anxiety. Sometimes it's the other way around, though. Treating the anxiety helps with the sleep. So we treat someone with anxiety disorder with something like Zoloft and psychotherapy, and then their insomnia gets better. So the question you want to ask yourself is if you're struggling with sleep, is it possible it's the noisy brain? Is it possible that there are things you could do to quiet the noisy brain? Is it possible that your sleeplessness is a product of anxiety or a mood disorder or a substance use issue? Is it a relationship issue? Is it that your bed partner is snoring and keeping you awake? Is it because you have kids in your bed and they're keeping you awake? Do you have cats and dogs in your bed? Actually, on a sidebar note, I have patients all the time who come in and tell me they're exhausted and they sort of imply they don't know why. And then you dig deep enough and it turns out they have cats and dogs and kids and, alarm clocks going off, or someone's getting up at 5 a.m. to exercise when that's not my patient's preferred time to get up. And it's purely relationship related. It's really about setting your boundaries and telling your people what you need. Now, you can't tell a newborn baby, please be quiet and let me sleep. But you can tell a cat to sleep in the basement. You can have your dog sleep in the other room. Those are not easy things to do. It's not easy to tell your spouse to stop sleeping. There's been lots of reporting lately I've seen in the Washington Post and the New York Times about the sleep divorce, how even happily married patients or people can sleep in different rooms and live fruitfully and happily ever after, speaking to the importance of sleep for relationships, but also for health. So my point is troubleshoot what you can. But to the extent you have a sleep problem that is beyond behavioral, beyond relationship, beyond sleep hygiene, it's worth talking to your doctor about what options you have because sometimes prescription medications for sleep are appropriate. All right. If you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to let you go and I'm going to be here next Friday. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always so fun to talk to you guys about these common things I see in my office. And please write me back on my newsletter. Tell me the topics you want to hear about in these lives. And I promise you, I'm going to bring in some more guests. I really want to talk more about menopause. I want to talk about urological health. The Urological Association of America came out this week with new guidelines on the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. And I'm going to try to bring on one of my friends to talk about that. And tell me what other subjects you want to talk about, because I could talk about so many different things, and I want to speak to what you guys are thinking about and worrying about in your everyday life. And tell me if you want to hear more about like stress management. I feel like that's a hugely important topic, and also a lot of people are talking about it. I've talked about it a lot, but maybe people want to hear more about stress management techniques. I know that there's never a bad day to talk about managing stress because guess what? Stress is everywhere. Aging. Let's talk about aging. Oh, and we're going to talk about cognitive health in more detail on another one. What is this one? FOGO. Fear of going out? Is that what that is, Lisa? Um, we'll talk about aging. We'll talk about cognitive health. We'll talk about urinary health. Um, a urologist who's full-time menopause doctor. Fantastic. Yeah, I think I'm going to bring on Mary Claire Haver who has a New York Times bestseller called The New Menopause. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 30 weeks in a row. She's a friend of mine, and she's going to come on, and we're going to talk about menopause. All right, I'm gonna let you guys go. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.